In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tells a number of parables about crops and fields, about good soil, and a parable about weeds. And in the parable about the weeds sown in with the good crop of wheat, Jesus tells us that we are to let the weeds grow, to let the weeds grow until harvest time, and then they will be separated out. He warns that if we try to separate out the weeds before harvest time, that we will damage the entire good crop. Later, Jesus explains that the weeds are the things and the people that have been sown by the evil one. The weeds are people and situations that cause sin and pain in our lives. I mean, it's easy for us to hear this parable and to jump to think that we are the wheat or the corn or whatever the good crop may be in your field. It's easy for us to self-righteously think that we are not the weeds in the story. I mean, nobody wants to be the weeds. But we would be deceiving ourselves if we truly believe that we have never been the weeds. I mean, the Apostle Paul tells us that we have all sinned and have all fallen short of the glory of God. We are all the weeds. We're all the weeds, and we're the good crop. We're the weeds in the wheat, or we're the weeds in the corn. We're the weeds, and whatever crop is sown in your field, we're the good and the bad all at the same time. In fact, it's even more complicated than that. I mean, too often we want to cast people out. We want to judge people because we think that they're sinful or evil because they don't worship like us, or they don't believe like us, or because they're different than us, and we want to see them as the enemy, as the evil one. We want to pluck them out from our ground. We want to pluck them out from our community, and as we do, we ruin what is good about who we are, the diversity that God has sown. Because we're not the ones who planted the seeds. Apparently, it's hard for us sometimes to truly know what the good crop is. And that's true for how we live in relationship to each other and in the world, but it's also true within our own lives, within ourselves as well. In the theory of internal family systems, which is an approach to psychotherapy that I've been researching for my doctoral degree, we learn that there are a diversity of parts, not just in our families and organizations and in our communities, but there are a diversity of parts even internally within ourselves, in our own mind. There are parts we like, and there are parts of ourselves we don't like. There are parts of ourselves that we're very proud of, and there are parts of ourselves that we'd be embarrassed if people knew. There are parts of ourselves that help us to experience joy. And there are parts of ourselves that react and cause us to experience grief or sadness, or sometimes even fear or anger. There are parts of ourselves that cause us to do the things that we'd consider evil. Those are inside of us, and there are also parts of ourselves inside of us that are shining examples of the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, that's why Jesus cautioned his disciples not to be like the Pharisees who went around plucking people out like weeds and calling them sinful without even being willing to examine their own life. Jesus knew it was much more complicated than just those things and people that are good and those things and people that are bad. That's why he said to let the weeds grow with the crop, because he didn't want us to damage what is good in someone else by pulling out what you judge to be not good. Jesus was drawing the people, those who were listening. He was drawing them in so much deeper than the text appears at first reading. You see, because in the context of the passage, Jesus had just had several encounters with the Pharisees who kept criticizing and challenging him for who he was eating with and who he was healing. He told us that God will take care of separating out the weeds from the wheat. It's your job to work on you. It's your job to work on yourself. It's your job to cultivate the soil of your own soul so that you can prove to be good soil. And when you fail to till the soil of your soul, because you already dealt with that one time, you can become the very weeds you're trying to avoid. You see, Jesus understood that it is so much more complicated than just good or evil, right or wrong. We are each our own field. And there are weeds that pop up in all of us at times. When we get lazy and quit doing the work to keep our souls, to keep our soil healthy. Sometimes what we consider to be weeds are actually there for a reason. So, I learned growing up as my dad would take me out to the family farm that sometimes the things that we would consider weeds, they actually have a good and valuable purpose. Weeds can help give indications of the health of your soil. They can help to give nutrients to your ground. They can help to prevent soil erosion. They are there for a reason. And when the ground is healthy, they will subside and your good crop will win out. But when the ground is not healthy, the weeds will win out and they will dry out the ground and they'll suck out the life from your crops. They will hoard all the sunlight, which in plant life is like sucking out all the oxygen in the room. And we all know people like that. That is why it's important to pay attention when weeds are growing in your field, in your soul. They're there for a reason, and that reason isn't all bad. It's trying to tell us something about the health of our soil, the soil of our soul, and the soul of our community. For instance, in our communities, when there are things that are happening that we would like to consider weeds, things that we might consider sinful or evil, they actually are an invitation from Jesus for us to pay attention. Something is not healthy. For instance, when there is crime or violence, when there are protests and riots, when there is fear and anguish in our communities, these aren't just weeds to be sprayed with toxic chemicals. They are there to get us to pay attention to the health of our soil. And right now in our nation, our soil is sick with systemic racism and systemic poverty. We need the weeds, which some might actually see as wildflowers, to remind us that we need to till the ground again. Or we need to help the ground so that the weeds can help us to keep the ground from completely eroding beneath us. We need the weeds to be turned into nutrients to help us get healthy soil again. We cannot just go around pulling out the things that we would consider weeds without destroying the good crop. And we cannot just ignore that they are there. The weeds are there for a good reason, and that is how it is in our own lives and in our minds as well. Oftentimes the things that we would consider weeds in our minds are actually experiences from our past or even emotions inside of us that are crying out to be heard. Emotional reactivities we need to listen to. When we are feeling angry or fearful or anxious, when we're feeling activated, that's a good sign. We need to pay attention. Those feelings aren't just weeds to be plucked out Don't try to be like a macho man that you are too good, that you cannot pay attention to the feelings within inside of you. They are there for good reason. They are there to help us to know when we need to till the soil of our souls. So let the weeds and the crop grow together. Pay attention to the things you'd consider the weeds, because when they take over, you know it's time to till the soil of your own soul. I mean, until we can do that in and for ourselves, until we're able to pay attention to those parts of ourselves that we would like to consider weeds, I mean, we'll never be able to control the growth of true weeds, of the true causes of sin and evil that are growing out in our world. We'll never be able to break the divide that causes us to try to separate ourselves from those that are the other. We'll never break the divide that causes us to see the other as a weed that we don't need. The other nationality, the other race, the other religion, the other church, the other political party, the other gender, the other person, the other child of God. Because we are all children of God. May you know in your own life that God is the sower of the seeds that were planted inside of you from the very beginning. God planted seeds of love and compassion inside of you. May you know that that is your true crop. That's who you truly are. That is the harvest, love and compassion. That is the harvest that we're all called to yield. But when the weeds of anger or disgust or fear start to crop up, if resentment or apathy or even hatred is what you're yielding, that's when you know it's time to cultivate the soil of your own soul so that the seeds of love and compassion may grow.